All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Appropriations Subcommittee for Public Safety and Administration. Today we have 5 agencies that we're going to hear from. We are going to start with the Executive Department for Boards, Commissions, and Offices, and we'll begin with our budget analyst, Mr. Jacob Polikoff. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start with a quick description of the Boards, Commissions, and Offices Unit. The Boards, Commissions, and Offices Unit of the Executive Department contains various entities created by an executive order or statute to provide planning and coordination for executive branch functions, or to investigate and make recommendations on problems affecting the administration of government or the welfare of the state. The unit includes survey commissions, the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs, the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, the State Ethics Commission, the Healthcare Alternative Dispute Resolution Office, the State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy, the Governor's Grants Office, the State Labor Relations Board, the Governor's Coordinating Offices Shared Services Unit, the Board of Contract Appeals, and the Maryland Corps Program. This analysis continues to reflect the budget for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, MCAAHC, which had formerly functioned within the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. Chapters 451 and 452 of 2022 established MCAAHC as an independent agency. As a result, it is separate but remains part of this analysis this year. The operating budget summary for fiscal 2024 shows a $1.2 million or 4.7% increase in the budget to $26.3 million. And if we look at page 2, we can see some fast information on deficiency spending for fiscal 2023. Proposed deficiency appropriations supplement the fiscal 2023 budget by $1.3 million in general funds and $9,287 in special funds. Deficiencies are provided for a few purposes. $639,916 in general funds to fund a settlement for claims raised by the U.S. Department of Justice concerning the administration of AmeriCorps grants within the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism. These claims brought by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland included violations of the AmeriCorps grant requirements, improper charging of salaries to the AmeriCorps grant, and overcharging AmeriCorps on certain federal financial reports. This settlement also included a 3-year compliance agreement wherein AmeriCorps will govern and monitor GOSV's AmeriCorps awards to ensure compliance with grant procedures. And GOSV should comment on what internal changes can be made to prevent a reoccurrence of issues which led to this settlement, as well as any changes made to alleviate issues created by the settlement. Additionally, there were $142,057 in general funds to fund the Minority Business Enterprises Ombudsman position, along with 2 compliance positions. A little over $45,000 in general funds to fund a dedicated fiscal position in the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. $19,740 in general funds and $9,287 in special funds to supplement the appropriation for reclassification of 4 positions with the State Ethics Commission. $30,850 in general funds to fund contractual salary adjustments for the State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy. And finally, $382,028 in general funds to fund 3 Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals board members and 3 law clerks. Moving forward to 2024, as shown in Exhibit 1, which is on page 3, you'll find an exhibit providing a breakdown of agency spending by program. GOCI leads the spending for fiscal 2024. Again, this chart incorporates the budget for the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, which accounts for 6% of the total budget. And we have the Maryland Corps Program budgeted at $5 million in fiscal 24, which is 19% of spending this year. Going forward to page 4, we'll find a breakdown of this year's budget increase of $1.2 million, 4.7%. As mandated by Chapter 451 of 2022, the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture gains about $900,000 in this budget, which brings their total allowance to $1.6 million. The largest changes in the personnel area are new positions, increasing about $548,000, along with the annualization of the November 2022 cost of living adjustment, which came out to about $255,000. Actually, pardon me, 10. Sorry about that. Pardon me, both of those numbers. $548,000 for the new positions and $108,000 for the cost of living adjustment. Pardon me, sorry about that. Other changes, those numbers will make sense. The contractual positions increased $259,000 this year, and another large change was grants to state agencies increased by about $255,000 this year. Those state agencies include, among others, the Department of Natural Resources, the University of Maryland, and the Volunteer Maryland Program, among others. We can now look to page 6 for a discussion of some personnel data. The fiscal 24 analysis adds 6 regular positions, the fiscal 24 allowance adds 6 regular positions and 2 contractual positions. 5 of these new regular positions are for the Maryland Core Program. And then on to page 7. The first major observation for this analysis is that the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture is formally established as an independent agency, and the Banneker Douglas Museum enhances engagement. So just to refresh, Chapter 452 of 2022 established MCAHC as an independent unit within the executive branch. Legislation also required that the governor include $1.6 million for the commission in the annual budget bill. This increased the general fund appropriation for the commission from $789,000 and change in fiscal 23 to $1.6 million in fiscal 24. In addition to overseeing the Banneker Douglas Museum, the commission also administers the African American Heritage Preservation Program with the Maryland Historical Trust. This is a competitive grant program supporting African American heritage properties, and it's offered yearly to nonprofit organizations and local jurisdictions. Museum activity was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which altered the way accessibility and visibility to interested audiences is measured by the commission. As Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows, engagement appears to grow substantially between fiscal 19 and fiscal 2020, and again between fiscal 2021 and 2022. During the pandemic-induced limitations to in-person visitation, the museum shifted to a larger online presence and began including online interactions in its reported measure beginning in fiscal 2020. Then in fiscal 2022, engagement data is reported as in-person visitations along with engagement via various online platforms. In-person visitors totaled 4,868 individuals in fiscal 2022, approximately half of the in-person population that visited the museum in fiscal 2019. Going to page 8, we'll see that the new metrics that the Commission has begun to report with the fiscal 2022 actual data include tracking visits to the Commission's website as well as social media engagement with profiles for the museum on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, along with the YouTube channel. In fiscal 2022, the first year for which this data is available, 153,508 interactions were recorded with the website, YouTube channel, and other social media profiles. A full breakdown of the first year of data, as well as projections for fiscal 2023 and 2024, is found on Exhibit 4 in the middle of page 8. And the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture should comment on how their operations have changed since becoming an independent agency and their plans for continued expansion and engagement with the community. On to page 9, we'll find the second key observation. The Minority Business Enterprise Program has remained somewhat stagnant this year in terms of involvement and engagement. The MBE was established in 1978 with the goal of promoting the inclusion of small businesses whose owners are socially and economically disadvantaged in the state's procurement and contracting opportunities. Since fiscal 2014, the goal for participation in the MBE has been 29%, but this goal has been missed in each fiscal year since that point. The previous goal was 25%, and that number also has not been achieved in any fiscal year since fiscal 2014. Exhibit 5 in the middle of page 9 shows that the level of MBE participation has remained mostly stagnant in recent years. Fiscal 2021 MBE participation was 17.1%, which was an increase from the recent low of 14.2% in fiscal 2020, but is still 11.9 percentage points below the goal of 29%. The Outreach to the small business community in an effort to increase MBE participation has not resulted in any substantial progression towards the 29% goal for MBE participation, nor toward the 15% goal for the Small Business Reserve SBR participation goal. Additionally, events are hosted each year focused on educating and training members of the procurement community in an effort to increase MBE and SBR participation. In fiscal 2021, 31 events were held to train small businesses on the MBE program, and 12 events were held to train the procurement community. In contrast, 36 events were held for small businesses in fiscal 2022, which is 5 more than the year prior, while only 10 events were held for the procurement community, a decrease of 2 from the previous year. Exhibit 6 on page 10 illustrates the number of these events held each year, and it's worth noting that procurement community events were not held before 2021. With MBE and SBR participation remaining stagnant for an extended period of time, data has been collected from participating agencies on the agency's MBE liaisons. In calendar 2022, 73 agencies were surveyed, 64 submitted a response, and 56 agencies reported having the role of MBE liaison filled in calendar 2022. One question on the survey was, what is the average amount of time the MBE liaison spends administering the MBE program weekly? The answers from the agency liaisons are depicted on on Exhibit 7, found on page 11. The Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting that GOSPA continue to collect and report the findings of the MBE participation and liaison attainment surveys in order to monitor the state's progress toward achieving its MBE goals. In addition, the agency should comment on how it utilizes the data gathered from the survey to improve MBE participation and discuss other methods that could be utilized for further increasing MBE participation and the impact of MBE liaisons. On page 12, we'll find a third key observation discussing volunteer activity, which remains low post-pandemic. The Governor's Office of Community Initiatives Volunteer Maryland program is tasked with developing volunteer programs that help to meet needs in multiple areas, including economic opportunity, education, disaster services, veterans and military families, and others. Since the onset of the pandemic, multiple metrics used to track volunteer contributions in the Volunteer Maryland program have suffered significant decreases. One of the figures with the most change is the value of volunteer hours and in-kind contributions. In fiscal 2018, the value of volunteer hours and in-kind contributions was $5.85 million, and that has decreased to $1.32 million in 2019. And in fiscal 2022, the value fell all the way to $582,000. Exhibit 8 in the middle of page 12 shows the change in the value of volunteer hours since fiscal 2018. Exhibit 9, found on page 13, shows volunteer hours contributed to the state falling by more than 70% between fiscal 2020 and 2021, falling from over 58,000 hours to 16,940 hours. Although there was modest growth in fiscal 2022, the fiscal 2023 estimate is still 35,000 hours below the pre-pandemic level. The Volunteer Maryland program should comment on the change in the value of volunteer hours and in-kind contributions, which has been present since fiscal 2019 before the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, the Volunteer Maryland program should comment on any efforts being undertaken to increase the value of volunteer hours and in-kind contributions. We'll next reach the Maryland Corps program. The Maryland Corps program and the associated Maryland Corps program fund were created by Chapter 654 of 2016. Chapter 37 of 2022 established a mandate of $5 million in fiscal 2024, with increased amounts mandated in the fiscal years following. This program provides service opportunities to at least 100 participants, and the service opportunities address various social needs of communities across the state. The Maryland Corps program is a significant state initiative to promote service and volunteerism in the state. Executive Order 01.01.2023.02 was issued by the governor on January 19th of this year, and this order created a new Department of Service and Civic Innovation, DSCI. The order specifies that GOSV and Maryland Corps are assigned to this new department, and the administration should comment on the operational plans for the Maryland Corps program and how it fits in with the plans for DSCI. Finally, on page 15, we'll find the recommended action, which is to adopt the following narrative which states concern with the continued low MBE attainment in state procurement, and that Small Business Reserve and MBE program liaison positions remain vacant in some state agencies. Recommends requesting a report in consultation between GOSPA and the Department of General Services to continue to administer the agency MBE participation and liaison surveys and report the results by agency to the committees. With that, that's all I have for you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jacob. That was a really thorough analysis, and also thank you for mentioning the fact that the Commission on African American History and Culture and the museum are now a separate entity from the former GOCI, as I think Delegate Henson would really like the fact that we mentioned that today. So just wanted to thank you for that. Do we have any additional questions for the analyst? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We will now bring up the agency representatives. I have Sharon Lewis, Chanel Johnson, Mona Vega, and Samelia, if you would come to the front. And please reintroduce yourself, because Samelia, I do not want to mess up your name at all. So please,
Chair Bridges, we would like instead, my name is Mona Vaidya. We would like instead to have Ms. Shamika Little at the table.
I don't mind that at all.
Thank you.
Ms. Littles, please come on up. Thank you all again very much for being here. Ms. Littles, I believe you're going to start for us today.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Shamika Littles. I am the Chief of Finance and Operations for the Governor's Coordinating Office's Shared Services Unit. Written testimony has been provided to you on behalf of the boards, commissions, and offices. We thank you for the opportunity to appear before you each year as you review the proposed budget. The boards, commissions, and offices are comprised of various budgetary units. Those representatives are here with us today, and if Mr. Chair, with your permission, if I can introduce them. We have the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, Nicolette Young, the Director of Budget and Finance. The Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs, Pamela Gregory, the Chief of Staff.
I was going to say, if you could either raise your hand or just stand once she introduces you.
The Maryland State Ethics Commission, Jennifer Algier, the Executive Director. The Healthcare Alternative Dispute Resolution Office, Mr. Harry Chase, Executive Director.
Back from our 2019.
The Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy, Mr. David Soule, the Executive Director. The Governor's Grants Office, Ms. Jennifer Colton, the Director. The Maryland State Labor Relations Board, Ms. Erica Snipes, the Executive Director. Maryland State Board of Contract Appeals, Chairwoman Bethany Brinkley. And the other units include the Governor's Coordinating Office's Shared Services Unit and the Maryland Core Program. We would like to thank our assigned analyst, Mr. Jacob Polico, for his work and acknowledgments throughout the analysis. It's been a pleasure to work with you. The boards, commissions, and offices have instituted various cost-saving measures in order to put forth another responsible spending plan for fiscal year 24. Mr. Chair, I'm joined here at the table with my colleague, Dr. Samelia Akpadu-Fuza, who will respond to the analyst request for comment on page 2.
If you don't mind.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Samelia Okpodu-Puza, the Director of the Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism. You have my written testimony before you. At this point, I'd like to highlight key findings as it relates to the comments from the analyst. The Governor's Office on Service and Volunteerism, also known as GOSV, underwent a routine Office of Inspector General audit that began in early calendar year 2018 and culminated in 2022. The scope covered a period of 2016 through 2019 for the office's administrative grants and not its pass-through AmeriCorps programs. The U.S. Attorney's findings pertain to the processes surrounding grant allocation timesheet reporting and in-kind contribution documentation. There have been many internal changes that have been made, which include multiple layers of approval for staff and supervisor timesheets, in addition to a multi-step reconciliation process of timesheet and salary expenditures. Policies and procedures regarding in-kind contributions have been updated, whereas GOSV will digitally store all in-kind contribution documents to ensure accessibility. To alleviate the issues created by the settlement, GOSV hired and onboarded a director who was not in that role during the period of 2016 through 2019. And as required by the compliance agreement, GOCI hired a dedicated director of budget and finance that works with the GOSV fiscal staff. GOSV has revised existing policies around timekeeping, in-kind documentation, and training, and has implemented a required training plan for all GOSV staff. All of these items are included in a 3-year compliance agreement that's noted in the analysis. These are my official comments, and I am available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Just one quick question. You said this audit was done between 2018 and 2022, and there were multiple, staffing changes during that time. Was that at the director's level? Was that?
That's correct.
How many directors were there during that time?
I believe at least 3.
I thought there were
Yeah.
multiple directors at the time, so
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions? All right. If not, we can move on to the next agency.
Thank you for your time. If there are no other questions, my colleague Sharon Lewis from Volunteer Maryland will respond to the next key observations.
Thanks.
Sorry. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Sharon Lewis, the Director of the Volunteer Maryland AmeriCorps program. You have written testimony before you, but I will provide a few highlights in response to the analyst comments. Volunteer Maryland is an AmeriCorps program whose members serve a year of national service as volunteer coordinators in community organizations in Maryland. These AmeriCorps members report the number of hours served by volunteers at our partner sites to Volunteer Maryland. The data that they report to us is what is reported to the state through the MFR. The hours and the in-kind value of volunteer contributions are linked together. We calculate the in-kind contribution amount based on the current value of a volunteer hour as reported annually by 2 independent organizations, the Independent Sector and the University of Maryland's Do Good Institute. This annual report serves as an industry standard for charitable organizations to quantify the value of volunteers and their service. Nationwide, as reported by an AmeriCorps report, there has been a 7 percentage point decrease in volunteering since 2019, even as the pandemic has become less acute. The other factors impacting the reported decline are the AmeriCorps member recruitment and retention challenges that Volunteer Maryland, like other AmeriCorps programs in Maryland and across the country, are experiencing at this time. We are competing with a strong job market and rising inflation, The modest AmeriCorps living allowance of $16,500 for a year of full-time hours is a barrier for many individuals to serve or commit to or complete a year of service. In an effort to address and increase the volunteer hours and in-kind contributions reported by our partners, we are seeking to increase the size of our AmeriCorps member cohort, the number of partner sites that we partner with, and work and engage with more stakeholders and community organizations during the recruitment process. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee, for inviting me to speak today about our program. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll just continue to go down the row, and we'll follow up with questions at the end.
Oh, thank you for your time. I will pass to my colleague, Shamika Littles, to respond to the next key observations.
Mr. Chair, if I may bring up Ms. Pamela Gregory, the Chief of Staff for the Governor's Office on Small Minority Women Business Affairs, to respond to the observation with respect to MBE participation.
Yep, please.
Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Written testimony has been provided. Key observations under page 11, minority business enterprise participation remain stagnant. Gospel concurs with your recommendation that we continue to collect and report the findings of the MBE attainment and MBE liaison surveys. Since beginning this task in 2021, our role was specifically to collect and report the data. No analysis was performed. In particular, the financial data submitted was not scrubbed for accuracy, a process that we conduct prior to reporting the MBE performance data in the legislatively mandated annual report issued later. In response to your request, we will include our comments on how to utilize the data to improve MBE participation and discuss any methods that could be utilized to increase MBE participants and the impact of MBE liaisons with our response by the December 1st, 2023 deadline. In conclusion, GOSBA concurs with the operating budget recommended actions on page 15. I'm prepared to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Was there anyone else that needed to come up before I go to the questions? You have one more person. Okay.
So I'm going to turn this back over to Shamika Little.
Okay, thank you. It's a big group.
Thank you again. I'd just like to add that on page 14 of the analysis that the analyst asked for a comment on the Maryland Corps program. And we did submit an official statement, but I'll just reiterate that the fiscal year 2024 budget before you has the Maryland program located in the board's commission's office's budget. And as you're aware, as mentioned in the document, the governor introduced the executive order outlining the creation of the Department of Service and Civic Innovation, which includes the Maryland Corps program. There will be a hearing held on February 28th in the Senate and on March 6th in the House, and at that time, more details can be provided. So thank you for your time. This concludes the testimony for D15 boards, commissions, and offices and their budget. But now we have my colleague, Ms. Chanel Johnson, the Executive Director of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. She will respond to the next key observation on page 7.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Little. Greetings, Honorable Chair Bridges, Vice Chair Ivy, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today. You have my written testimony. I'd also like to thank our assigned analyst, Mr. Jacob Polikow, for his hard work and acknowledgments of our efforts throughout the analysis. He is a pleasure for our office to work with. The Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture currently operates the Banneker Douglas Museum, your state museum on African American history and culture, as well as the African American Heritage Preservation Grant Program in partnership with Maryland Historical Trust. In FY 2022, as you mentioned, Honorable Bridges, the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture was legislated as an independent state agency. Since that time, the Commission has worked diligently with the Governor's Office of Finance during this time of transition. The Commission plans and is en route to onboarding a Chief Financial Officer and program support staff by spring and summer of FY 2023. The Chief Financial Officer will manage the Commission's fiscal activities, audits, and procedures. The new program staff will improve the quality and reach of the Banneker Douglas Museum's core services, such as our traveling and on-site exhibitions, youth and education programs, and marketing and outreach. These positions are critical to the success of the Commission and its operation of the Banneker Douglas Museum and its ongoing service to the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that end the rest of the testimony, Ms. Littles?
Yes, that concludes the testimony.
Thank you all very much. Definitely appreciate you all being here. And we all realize that, you know, this is a new administration and things are in flux. And so we appreciate your time and bringing all this information and all of your observations forward today. Are there any questions from the panelists? Delegate McComas.
I was just wondering that I know there's a lot of different venues that are for African American history all over the state, and I was wondering if it would be a good idea create a synergy that if you kind of had them like, okay, this is in Garrett County, this is in Harford County, this is in, and to help and it would stimulate, I would think, some good tourism opportunities. And you know, I know that you're kind of focused on the Banneker Museum, but I think there's a black wax museum. I've never seen it, but it's down in the middle of the city, and I love wax museums, but I just haven't had the time to get down. So I'm just kind of wondering if that would be helpful for folks that would kind of want to explore, you know, the Harriet Tubman Trail. I know there's some information about that, but it's just there's kind of a lot of stuff out there, but it's kind of not all linked together. It would be helpful, particularly if you want to create Maryland, because of Alex Haley and everything. Maryland has a significant history of the African American experience, good, bad, and ugly. So I just kind of wondering if that might be something you might want to think about as how you would want to market the whole state and the different areas of the state. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that rambled on, but
That's an excellent point. Such as the National Smithsonian African American Museum, where tourists come in and they are inspired to go back to their communities to learn about Black history. It's the same thing with our state's museum. We want our tourists to come and learn, be inspired to learn about Black history in their own respective communities in the state of Maryland. So we consistently guide people to the Great Blacks and Wax Museum and the 14 plus other African American cultural centers throughout our state. And I also want to make mention that the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture operates the Banneker Douglas Museum, but those are governor-appointed seats that represent all parts of the state of Maryland, and their core responsibility is to amplify and support African American heritage preservation throughout the state. So that's a core part of our work. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for mentioning the fact that you want to come to Baltimore and visit the Great Blacks and Wax Museum.
Yes.
You are now going to make that my mission to take you to that museum. Are there any other questions for the analyst? I'm sorry, for this panel. Delegate Ivey did want me to ask one question. He actually had to leave to go to a bill hearing. But he did have a question just around affirmative action. And if the Supreme Court throws out affirmative action, many of the initiatives around the MBE might be deemed unconstitutional. Have we begun to plan for this worst-case scenario?
That is another great question. We've been asked that a few times. That is a question that would be better directed to the Office of the Attorney General. Their civil rights under that office would have more information about that, but we are watching it closely.
Thank you. The Attorney General's office also comes before this committee, so we'll be sure to ask that question.
Yes, most definitely.
All right. Any other questions? Delegate Stonka.
Yeah, so just to follow up to the, and I was looking through, I don't think I missed it, but the marketing efforts to reach the threshold that your office is working on. Can you talk a little bit about, more in depth about what that looks like, what it has looked like, and what you intend to have that look like in the future?
So I have with me today my communications director, and as soon as you started talking about marketing, I'm sure she sat up straight. So I will let Miss Allison Tavitt, she's our director of communication, if that's allowed, to respond to the marketing and outreach efforts.
Projection is usually not a problem for me, so I really don't need a microphone. But I will tell you that ensuring that our vendor community can compete with confidence is really what our outreach and training program is all about. So we use webinar platforms and conduct 2 free trainings every month. Yeah, is that okay?
You know, we're also virtual, so we want people out there to hear you as well.
Fantastic. So I'm Allison Tavick, Director of Communications and Outreach with the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs. Our office is all about preparing the vendor community to be able to compete with confidence. That's the main goal here. Not everyone can win, but they need to understand how to compete in the very competitive arena that is state procurement. Prime contractors and subcontractors compete very differently. Their channels are completely separate from each other. So we conduct a program called just renamed actually to the technical and, the Training and Insights for Procurement Success. Our TIPS webinar series is conducted 2 sessions every month for free to the small business vendor community, and we teach procurement strategies as well as business development, the things that businesses have to be successful in any competitive arena. We get great participation in those classes, somewhere between 60 to 75 participants for each session. Depending on the topic, can get as high as 100 to 125 people. Our curriculum is very diverse and really targets what we think are the needs of the small businesses, understanding how to respond to solicitations, how to manage our programs. Probably one of the most successful pieces of information we provide is actually how to mine public data. So we have a wonderful web series that's actually videos and slide decks to teach people how to use our platforms. We have very open and transparent systems here in Maryland. So to teach vendors how to mine eMaryland Marketplace, the state's procurement forecast, and the documents produced by the Board of Public Works so that they can find opportunities, identify trends, and learn how to compete successfully, or at least with confidence.
May I? So I appreciate all those answers, and thanks, Mr. Chair. Looking at the pull-through, and I was trying to look this up as you were speaking, do you know what the numbers are for MBE for prime versus subprime? So what it pulls through at? I see 16% was the number for MBE attainment for 2023, estimated 16.5 for 22. But what the breakdown is between those 2 subgroups you just spoke to?
I do know that number.
Could you share that?
Based on the last fiscal year of reporting, it is 1/3 of the dollars that are being paid out are going to MBE prime contractors, and 2/3 are going to MBE subcontractors. It's actually the reverse for our veteran community. VSBEs are winning at the prime level at 66% of the time and performing in the subcontracting arena at one-third.
Thank you.
I'm new to appropriations, and they're all suffering for it. But is it possible you could send me some of the links that I could kind of push out to my constituents that are women and minority owned, and also just to help me see what's out there? Because when you said data mining, how do you data mine? I'm like, my little ears perked up because I don't know how to data mine. So I'm
It's
interested.
beautiful.
Okay, great.
It's
Thank
beautiful.
you.
I can, and actually I know you all get a lot of email. You get it from us every month. We send you the announcements for the TIPS webinar series every month so that you would hopefully share them with your community so that they can understand how to connect to these awesome training opportunities. But I will absolutely would love to send you the links to the mining public data because it's very, very insightful.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to this panel. Appreciate the information. Quick question as to, one, we are not meeting our MB participation goals, but neighboring jurisdictions are, and I'm just curious as to when it comes to marketing and ways of getting these RFPs, contracts, bids, et cetera, out there. Are we looking at other jurisdictions and best practices and copying that over here? Are we doing anything different to what other jurisdictions are doing who are meeting their MBE goals?
Procurement, of course, is a separate process from what our office does. So we have oversight of the implementation of the programs, but the actual procurement process is done at the agency level, right? And it is, we've tried to participate in and tried to study these comparative analysis of state by state. And the reality is, while inclusion and diversity is an apple, it's a different apple in every single state. So the laws and regulations and how we do it to achieve it are so different. It's super hard to look at a neighbor and say, because we may be more finite or streamlined in what we are willing to count, and they're more open to counting things that by our definition will not count towards the goal. So it is something that we watch and monitor and we keep an eye on. Our real focus, at least in our office, has been the contiguous states around Maryland, because that's who our vendor community has access to compete in those arenas as well. So we absolutely watch it. It just, and where we can learn things from other people, yeah, I'm a copycat. Show me something that's working because I want to do it too. And really what's happening is the other states are copying us.
All right.
So,
Thank you very much. I think that will end the hearing for our executive department. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to working with you more in the future. We will now move on to the State Treasurer's Office, and we'll begin with the analyst, Mr. Patrick Frank.
The State Treasurer's Office budget hearing. I'm Patrick Frank, the analyst for this agency. The State Treasurer is one of 3 members of the Board of Public Works. What the agency does basically has 3 larger parts to it. One is the state's self-insurance program. The state is self-insured, and this is our insurance company, if you will. There's also a treasury management program, which is basically the cash flow management of the state and the state's checkbook. And finally, there's debt management as well, selling bonds for the capital program. There's a separate analysis for that will be heard next for the public debt, so we won't cover that topic. I'll mention on the first page there is a decrease in spending. We'll talk briefly about that later. If you go to page 2, exhibit number 1, there's a pie chart there that shows the different kinds of objects, if you will, that the state aid that has. 70% of the spending is fixed costs. Those are the insurance premiums, and that is essentially your insurance program. There, about 14% is salaries and wages, the staff that do the work. Another 15% is for contracts. Obviously, the agency has a lot of contracts with its, for cash management and things like that as well. Page 3, Exhibit 2 has another pie chart, and this shows how the agency is funded. Once again, 70% is reimbursable funds for insurance coverage. Those are your premiums. Another 8% of that is also for the insurance program, but that is the management. That's the staff that run the program. Then there's about 13%, which is general funds, and that's the treasury management that does the cash and things like that. Also, they charge agencies for some of the services they provide, so they get some reimbursable funds as well. Kind of just quickly, on pages 4 and 5 is our detail about how the budget is changing from year to year. And really the story here is if you go down about the 6th line or so, you can see an almost $3 million decline in spending. That's for the financial systems modernization project. This agency is going to have some bumpy cash spending over the next few years, as that's common when you have a large IT program going through. And so your changes are really going to be around that. The rest of the budget is fairly steady. I'll move on now to page 6, exhibit number 4. And this is the vacancy rates for the agency. And as was mentioned last year, there was a generational change at the top of the Treasurer's office, and a lot of people that retired when the prior treasurer left, and now we have a new treasurer. So there was a high vacancy rate. We expected this number to go down, and it did. Now it went from about 35% to about 17%. It's still a bit high, but unfortunately all agencies are struggling with high vacancy rates these days. The agency has done some things to do that. Some positions were reclassified, and some telework was instituted, so the reforms seem to be making a difference. I'll talk about the insurance program as the first key observation. I do want to clarify something. In the second paragraph of page 7, I mentioned that the state's liability is $400,000. That is correct, except that what I didn't say is, and I noticed this morning, is there's also an exception to that, and there's an $890,000 liability for law enforcement officers in certain situations. And so there is that carve out as well. So I just wanted to be clear about that. On page 5, Exhibit 8 is some basic cash flow information. I'm sorry, processing claims information about the number of claims and stuff. As you can see in 21 and it's in 20 and 21, the claims did decrease a little bit, and they're coming back. This may well be pandemic. It's too early to really tease out to what extent the pandemic and telework and things are changing things, and to what extent it's not, but it's something to watch. Also in the insurance program, the way this program is supposed to work is you have an actuary that recommends funding levels for you so that you're adequately funded. The world is an imperfect place. You don't really hit that number very often. Sometimes you're a little higher, sometimes you're a little lower. You adjust your program as you go high or low. As you can see in 21 and 22, on this chart, the amount that's in the fund is a little bit less than the actuarial amount. For the prior years, it was a little bit more. Reason for that, I think a good clue you can find on page 10 in exhibit number 7. What you can see here is these are the claims and for the different groups of insurance. And as you can see, the blue to your left, that is real and personal property. And that's really increased quite a bit from about $9 million a year in 2018 to almost to over $16 million in 2021. So it seems like one reason for the state going a little bit below its actuarial recommended funding levels is because of a spike in these kinds of claims. I hear that a lot of this is just the aging facilities and things like that are having a lot more claims now too. So So that is, and as you can see in the prior chart, the treasurer is making adjustments, and we are getting back to that level, and so that's it seems to be moving in the right direction. Page 11 has exhibit number 8. Now we're going to talk about the Treasury Management division that they have. And one of the things is, first of all, Treasury Management, you want to make sure you always have as much, I think of it as you want to have as much every morning when you wake up as you had in your account the night before. That's a key goal. A second is you can invest some of that money. And this exhibit shows investment performance. The bars is essentially the benchmark that the state wants to get out of its investments, and the line is where the state, what the state is achieving in its investments. One way you can get a better return on your investment is to invest in longer instruments that have longer maturities. The problem with this approach could be that if rates rise quickly, you will be stuck with the lower rates for longer. My conversations with Treasury Management, I was really curious because everybody knows that interest rates rose quite a bit in 2022. I was curious to see how the state would fare in this case. And it's interesting, the division was concerned about rising interest rates. They shortened their maturity so that they were able to respond to changes in the environment, and it seems to have worked as we didn't get caught. Like some I know some governments out there, they did not do very well in this because their maturities were a bit too long. I just want to point out too, there is internal staff that manages this within the Treasury's office. There also is a local government investment pool, which is for local governments, for them to put money. There's an exhibit about that on page 13. This pool is a little different in that the state contracts with a company to manage this pool, and the state basically sets the rules about how to manage it, and then that's the company and manages it. And so this shows what's interesting about this is the line is the assets in this, and it increased quite a bit in recent years, especially when the pandemic hit. Apparently, they suggest to me that locals have more cash than they did previously. Also, the bars there show compare the return in this pool to their benchmark. And so some years, 2020 was a bit higher and 2022 was a bit lower. The reason is interesting. I was told that in 2020, because rates were so low, they essentially couldn't charge all of their fees that they would have charged in order to keep it from some of the funds from going underwater. Now that when rates started to increase in 2022, they recouped their fees. So if it's kind of an evening out, if you will, is the way that trend was explained to me. And that is my analysis. Our recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance. And with that, I will take any questions and my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Are there any questions for our analysts? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We will now hear from our state treasurer. Thank you so very much for being here, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted not to say anything. He did such a great job and had no questions. I can only mess this up. First of all, I want to thank you all for having me here today, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. It's certainly an honor and a privilege to be here. To my right, I have the Chief Deputy Treasurer, John Martin, Keith Morris, our Chief Investment Officer. They're waiting on their own personal invitations, I think, to come up here. So I'm going to do that now. Mr. Morris, if you can join us up here, as well as Joyce Miller, our Director of the Insurance Division, if Joyce is with us today. Again, Mr. Frank, thank you certainly for your thorough and thoughtful analysis of our agency. I certainly appreciate it. And yes, you're absolutely correct. When we came, everybody left. I worked hard not to take it personal, but there was quite a bit of turnover in the state treasurer's office, and I more or less attribute that to my predecessor. She ran a good shop, and we had a lot of employees who had reached retirement age, and so they decided it was time pursue greener pastures. So we did inherit it. I believe we had a 33% vacancy. I believe that was the number. We have whittled it down some. Again, we want to thank the General Assembly because we needed to do things as it relates to reclassification of positions to just be competitive. A lot of what we do, certainly in insurance and banking, you can't compete with the private sector, nor are we trying to be perfectly honest. I mean, you can't do that, but we have to be competitive to the point that we can attract and retain workers. And so we're hopeful with the work that you all did with us and DBM that we're able to, have the type of attraction that we can get people to perform these services. My goal when I first took over, probably above all things, I wanted to make sure we didn't lose our AAA bond rating. I mean, we've had it forever, and I was just praying it didn't go on my watch. So we survived once again. And I guess one of the big takeaways from that in my conversations with the rating agencies and others, it's Maryland's prudent fiscal management. More so than anything else, what I've heard is they, and I'm paraphrasing, they like things such as our Spending Affordability Committee and Bureau of Board of Revenue Estimates and just our willingness to work together that, as my conversations with former Governor Hogan and French, all of the politics get put aside when we're talking about Maryland's finances and our rating, and so they certainly appreciate our team first approach. Another thing or objective that I had when I came in was just modernizing the office. It didn't need a full revamping or anything like that. As I said, the agency was working pretty good before I got there. But there were some things that we did, such as this year's House Bill 388 dealing with bond sales, House Bill 397 dealing with managing the state's investments. We brought that forward there. In the Senate cross files, they appear to be moving in a favorable direction. I've discussed our vacancy rates. I won't go back to that. As well as the investments that you've made, just made with us so that we're able to be competitive with the various industries we have to sort of compete with employees. It was noted that we needed to take a look at things to reduce real and personal property claims and losses, and that was outlined as well. We are going to continue working working with our sister agencies to do what we can. Obviously, I think a lot of it just deals with preventative maintenance, routine maintenance, so that, we're not, it's just like a vehicle or a home or anything else. If you aren't constantly maintaining it, that bill's going to come due all at once. And so, we're trying to be mindful of that as well. As I said in the formal written testimony, we've got certain examples that we provided of things that we're doing. We're evaluating the loss prevented unit to augment staffing and offer additional training to agencies throughout the year. That's enough. I can keep going on and on, but the bottom line is we certainly would concur with DLS's recommendation with the governor's allowance, unless you want to give more, in which case we would concur with that. And just thank you. And if I have all of these guys here, if you have any questions about our operations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Treasurer. Are there any questions? You are going to be really happy with us because we're not going to ask you any questions today.
Mr. Frank was awesome. So,
yep. Well, thank you for your testimony and submitting the information ahead of time as well. And so definitely appreciate it. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
You do the same. That will end the hearing for State Treasurer. Next, we will hear the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we'll start with our analyst, Morgan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Morgan Smith, and I will be presenting the operating analysis for the Department of Veterans Affairs this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. On page 1, you'll see the operating budget summary. In fiscal 2024, MDVA's budget decreases by $11.8 million, or 22.7%, to $40.2 million. And this decrease is primarily driven by the end of supplements that were provided to Charlotte's Hall Veteran Home. The contractor was being provided supplementary ARPA funds to ensure that they have enough revenues to run the home. There was also one-time funding last fiscal year to raise and realign headstones across Maryland's 5 veteran cemeteries. On page 2, there is a list of proposed deficiencies that are included in the fiscal 24 allowance. There are 3. There's one for a little over $77,000 in general funds to fund supplies, equipment, and a position for the Veterans Service Program. There's a second that is a little over $59,000 in federal funds for one contractual full-time equivalent position to provide consulting for the construction of the Sykesville Veterans Home. And there's a third proposed deficiency of a little over $35,000 in general funds for a contractual FTE position, supplies, and equipment to support the commission to establish a Maryland Women Veterans Memorial as required by Chapter 423 of 2022. On page 3, Exhibit 1 shows the overview of agency spending. 87% of total agency spending relates to the management and operation of Charlotte Hall Veterans Home and the veteran cemeteries. Within the $27.7 million fiscal 2024 allowance for Charlotte Hall, 91% is used for the contract providing care of veterans at the facility. And there's another $7.2 million for the cemetery program, which, as I said before, supports the 5 cemeteries across Maryland. Moving on to page 4, Exhibit 2 shows the proposed budget for MDVA and the major changes. Notably, increases across the department in personnel, contractual services, funding, and other expenditures are more than offset by the end of the supplement to Charlotte's Hall Veteran, the Charlotte Hall contractor, and the removal of one-time costs to raise and realign headstones. You'll see those at the bottom of the Where It Goes chart closest to the total. Moving on to page 5, you will see a discussion of personnel. In the fiscal 2024 allowance, there are 1.75 positions that were added by deficiency appropriation to the fiscal 2023 working. Those positions are, as I said, coming from the deficiency. They're not necessarily new positions for fiscal 2024. MDVA has 15 total vacant positions that you'll see at the bottom, and about a third of those are housed within the cemetery program, with 9 out of the 10 positions being veteran cemetery caretaker positions. DLS asked that MDVA comment on efforts to fill these vacancies. Moving on to page 7, you'll see Exhibit 3 shows the Charlotte's Hall Veteran Home resident census. The home was hit hard by COVID-19, much like other nursing homes and elder care facilities across the state. Charlotte Hall struggled with low resident levels. During the pandemic, they were unable to add new residents and faced fatalities as a result of the disease. These factors, combined with hesitancy to admit new family members due to concerns about communal living environments, exacerbated this decline. The home saw a decline from 87% occupancy, or nearly 400 residents, in December 2019 to 61%, or 276 residents, in December 2022. If you're looking at a colored version of the analysis, the red line at the top shows the license occupancy, while the purple line that is a little more wiggly shows the current occupancy rate over time. Due to the funding model at Charlotte Hall, the lower residency rate has had a direct impact on the contractor who provides these direct daily care to the veterans in the home. Federal fund reimbursements are sent in this funding model straight to the management contractor, who then pays the Veterans Affairs Department a bed lease of $18 per day, or about $2.9 million annually. The funds provided from the federal government are based on filled beds, whereas the bed lease from the contractor to MDVA is based on all beds, whether they are filled or not. Exhibit 4 on the following page shows how the revenue and expenditures have changed over the last few fiscal years, and in particular, you'll see that in fiscal 2022, the home saw increased expenditures which exceeded revenues. Continuing on that page, page 8, Exhibit 5 shows the revenue support that has been provided to Charlotte Hall since the beginning of the pandemic. They received about $10 million over the last 4 fiscal years to offset those revenue losses, and most recently they saw $4 million being provided in fiscal 2023. You'll note that in fiscal 2024, the allowance does not include funding for this purpose, hence the 0 on the chart. We have asked that MDVA submit a report in collaboration with Charlotte Hall to address how they are going to adjust operations to accommodate the continued low revenue levels given the end of this operating grant. And we've also asked that they include efforts to increase staffing at the department. One of the items that I did not, I think, directly comment on in the analysis is that the home is also seeing lower staffing levels, which also poses issues when trying to bring in more residents, because without additional staffing, they can't provide care to every resident, and therefore it's hard for them to add new residents without the appropriate staffing levels to provide that direct care. So with that, I think that is the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. Just a quick question, just thinking about what you said just now, is the, in terms of staffing and residents, is it a matter of prioritizing getting more staff in order to increase residents, or is it prioritizing getting in residents to bring in, to make sure that there's staff? And it's probably a question for the agency, but yeah.
It is a question.
Since you thought about it, since you said something, I just thought about that.
I think it is a question for the agency. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation where, you know, it's hard to know which one we should be focusing on.
Yep.
But I think the department can comment on what their efforts currently are to address both.
Thank you. Any other questions for our analysts? Seeing none, thank you very much, Morgan. That was a very thorough presentation. We will now turn to Mr. Anthony Woods, Acting Secretary, and please introduce your panel as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate being here. Chairman Bridges, thank you very much, and members of the subcommittee. I've got with me Bob Finn, my Deputy Secretary, and Pete Panzer, the Director of Finance and Administration. I'll start with a similar thank you, Morgan, for your thorough analysis and for taking a real hands-on approach to understanding our department, its needs, and that is very much reflected in the great analysis that you've produced and presented. So thank you very much. My team has advised me that a 90-minute to 2-hour presentation is customary for a secretary, so hopefully you're ready for that. No, I'll simply say I have the privilege of being nominated by Governor Moore to be the incoming Secretary of Veterans Affairs. By way of introduction, I'm a 2-time Iraq War veteran and a proud Army veteran, and currently serve in the Army Reserve. So I'm excited about working to support our 371,000 veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. So it is truly a privilege. I'll keep it short and simply say that in the 3 short weeks that I have been with this department, I have been highly appreciative of the mission-driven team, small but mighty, and they take to heart how important it is to work hard for our Maryland's veterans. Last year, we've achieved a new record for veteran benefits awards over the last 5 years. $160 million of revenue, or excuse me, of benefits have been paid to our veterans, which makes a huge economic impact on our state. We've interned 3,500 veterans and dependents with dignity in our veterans cemeteries here in the state last year. And then, as mentioned about Charlotte Hall, caring for older veterans at Charlotte Hall is a incredibly important mission that we take very seriously. Finally, we preserve our veterans' memorials and are working on building new ones in partnership with our partners in the legislature. And we, of course, do a tremendous amount of work to reach out to various communities that we want to engage with and make sure they know about the benefits and opportunities and the programming that they have available to them. So Pete prepared wonderful responses to DBM's very thoughtful questions, so that is available to you, and we are delighted to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. Just the question that I had asked earlier, just in terms of staffing versus residents for Charlotte Hall, is it a matter of where are you prioritizing? Is it a matter of getting the staffing up so that you can bring in more residents, or trying to really go after those residents, which would in turn make you have to, bring in more staff? So.
Yeah, I think my initial response, and I'll invite my team to also weigh in, my initial response is actually both. So one, it is actually really incredibly important that we raise the staffing level to meet the need of our current residents and improve outcomes for those residents. So that is incredibly important to us. As we all know, COVID-19 has had a very significant impact on the healthcare community and senior living facilities. And so it is obviously a challenge in this macroeconomic environment to meet the salary requirements and encourage folks to apply to our numerous open positions there. So that is certainly something we work with the contractor on, increasing emphasis on and finding new ways to attract more folks. Similarly, when you bring in more residents, that helps with the economic situation for the home itself and for the contractor. And so raising the census is very much a priority. When you look at the VA's required or sort of estimate of what the state should have in terms of beds available for retired or retiring veterans, it's actually closer to 1,100. And so that's where you're seeing the great emphasis on building a new retirement home to be able to meet those needs in the near future. So, anything I missed there?
I would just like to add the fact that the VA keeps putting more emphasis on trying to Deputy Secretary Bob Finn, good afternoon, Chairman and Committee. The VA is increasingly putting pressure on having veterans stay at home, so home health care is important. So that's one thing that's competing against that. So, and also the private sector is also putting a little bit more emphasis on getting veterans to come to their homes because it helps them with getting funding through Medicaid, Medicare. So there's a competing priorities to capture that veteran and keep them either in the home or in a nursing home as opposed to a veteran's home. And plus, obviously, the other part of that is a geographic location. As you all know, at St. Mary's is in Southern Maryland, which is, again, one of the reasons we want to build a home more in Central Maryland to kind of start to go geographically, go where the veterans are for our home.
Thank you for that. Who's tracking that information about the veterans that are in home and getting the services there? Would that be this agency? I'm just trying to figure out. I know it's a competing with what we're trying to accomplish here, but I'm just trying to figure out how that information is tracked.
Probably something we would want to follow up with you on. This is certainly a
different agencies that would track that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then, of course, this is a change at the federal level that has created this opportunity for veterans to continue to sort of age in place and stay at home, which is a perfectly fine thing. So let us do a little bit more digging on that and probably follow up with you if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Delegate Acevedo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome and congratulations, Secretary Woods. Welcome to your team. I appreciate the information you all provided and certainly looking forward to working with you all. Would like to pose a question that I posed to the previous administration about veterans' homelessness. I represent a county that has effectively ended veterans' homelessness through a number of initiatives, earmarked funds, programs, etc. But Montgomery County, while the largest jurisdiction, is not the 23 other jurisdictions that make up Maryland. And so I'm curious as to what your department, in collaboration with the Department of Human Services, the Department of Housing, intend to do so that we're learning, I guess, from what Montgomery County did and seeing how we can effectively end veteran homelessness statewide and other jurisdictions. So would appreciate that. I totally understand if you all need to follow up with me, but curious as to whether this is something on your radar and if you all are already having discussions and plans about how to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very thoughtful question. The first thing I would say is, one, it is a challenge to end veterans' homelessness, and it's one of those things where it is actually sort of an ongoing thing, right? You have to sort of work in partnership with local organizations to continue to meet the needs of veterans who might experience homelessness at any given time. One of the mandates that I appreciate from Governor Moore is to always take a whole of government approach. And so I think what you've mentioned of working with partners across Maryland state government is how we would focus on solving not only veterans homelessness, but a number of the other very thorny challenges that this community faces, things like veteran suicide or underemployment or unemployment that requires more than just what the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs could do. So one of the things that we're quite excited about in the year ahead is looking for opportunities to work with county level veterans commissions and identifying best practices and sharing them. I know there's a significant amount of hunger for those types of answers, solutions, and approaches. And then similarly, highlighting the work of really effective nonprofits here in the state or in the region where they have developed great approaches to doing this. So I would say if we could follow up with you, it would be great for me to get an opportunity to learn from the organizations and leaders in your community, in your county, so we can make sure we're doing our best to highlight those things.
Appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, and because I understand there's certainly costs and money associated with this. Would love to also have that conversation about what that looks like, because we recognize it costs. There are funds that certainly need to be earmarked, but whatever that is, would greatly appreciate, even if it's a roadmap, right? Because my county effectively ended veteran homelessness in 2015. It's like 8 years ago, right? That's at least 2 administrations.
Incredible.
And so would very much be interested in working with you all on whether it's on funding or what needs to be done legislatively, but appreciate that.
I'll simply add that not only does funding for these types of innovative solutions go a long way, but there's also the personnel associated with it, which is also quite important to making sure that we have the force multipliers to help deliver the outcomes that we want to deliver in partnership with the legislature.
Thank you. Delegate McCombs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I think that perhaps one of the reasons that you might have trouble filling Charlotte Hall is it's a long ways away from my jurisdiction, and I suspect Western Maryland as well. And we're actually on the 95 corridor, Harford County. So I'm wondering if a part of the reluctance to go to Charlotte Hall is just because they wouldn't be able to visit with their grandchildren and their family. I think the wives can go with the husband if that's right. But, grandkids and sons and daughters, aunts and uncles, extended family, that's real important. And so I think it's really important to see what is the, besides staying in your home, I mean, then they stay in their neighborhood, but it is this fact that you are so far away from your family kind of what's causing some of the reluctance to go to Charlotte Hall. So I think that I would say it's probably a big deal, but I don't have any data to say that, but I just think it is. So I want to thank you for being here and for considering how you can help the veterans. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate McCombs, it's a very astute observation and one that I believe we also have seen and heard anecdotally as well. I sort of point back to the Department of Veterans Affairs estimate that it actually should be closer to 1,100 beds or spaces available across the state, given our large veterans population. And so, as you've rightly pointed out, when you locate that geographically throughout the state, people make that decision of how do I stay close to my loved ones, and as you can imagine, that actually improves care outcomes for those individuals when they have someone who's advocating for them and can be a part of their, and then it's just, of course, just better for morale. And so I think it's something that we're thinking a lot about, which is why we're excited about and appreciative of the $63 million which was set aside under the previous administration to help with the building of a second home. And then, of course, we'd love to partner with you in thinking through, how do we move towards kind of regional home model to even further address exactly what you've mentioned.
All right, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you again, Mr. Soon-to-be Secretary Woods. Definitely appreciate you being here and look forward to working with you in the future and to your team as well.
Thank you
so
much.
With that, that will end the hearing for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we will now hear from the State Department of Assessment and Taxation and our analyst, Mr. Ryan Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To begin with the to begin with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, we can see that the fiscal 2024 budget allowance would increase their budget by $4 million, or 2.5%, to $162.8 million. Moving on to page 4, looking at the performance analysis, we can see in Exhibit 1 that the SSTAT timeliness for personal property tax returns has improved since last year, but remains below pre-pandemic levels. The improvement since last year, the agency has indicated, is due to fewer impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, but they have yet to fully recover. Moving on to Exhibit 2 on page 5, we can see that the assessment accuracy of the real property assessors has declined about 5% since the previous year, which the department has attributed to the high turnover associated with real property assessors, and that, generally speaking, newer assessors are less accurate in their assessments. Additionally, moving on to Exhibit 3 on page 6, we can see that for the enterprise zone investment and participation, overall participants are up 8.9%, while investments are up 5.6% from the previous year. Additionally, on page 6, we can see that there's a proposed deficiency in fiscal 2023. And so for context, Chapter 717 of 2021 required SSTAT to inform homeowners of whether or not they were owed refunds as a result in changes for the way the homeowner's tax credit was calculated, and that funds for this purpose were to be drawn from the state's local reserve account. And the fiscal 2023 budget bill included 2 deficiency appropriations in SSTAT. One was for $9.9 million in special funds from the local reserve account, which was the estimated amount of refunds that would be repaid to homeowners. The other was $9.2 million of general funds to repay 14/15 of the total estimated refund amount to the local reserve account. The fiscal 2023 budget also included $660,000 to make the final estimated payment. In fiscal 2022, funds totaling $7.95 million were paid to homeowners under Chapter 717. These funds were paid as required from the local reserve account. However, the amount for 14/15 of the repayment were reverted in error. The fiscal 2024 budget includes one proposed deficiency for SSTAT totaling $7.3 million, which is to be used in conjunction with the $660,000 already in the fiscal 2023 budget to complete the repayment to the local reserve account. The deficiency appropriation is contingent upon the enactment of legislation to allow for the full repayment of the local reserve account for refunds paid to homeowners in fiscal 2022 under Chapter 717. Additionally, fiscal 2024, SSTAT has a general fund appropriation of $530,000 for the second year of repayment to the local reserve account as required under Chapter 717. This is to be reduced contingent upon the enactment of legislation to modify the repayment schedule, as the funds will be unneeded when full repayment is completed. There was also one planned reversion of $16 million for the homeowners tax credit program, which will bring expenditures in line with historical spending. Moving on to Exhibit 4. On page 8, we can see that the majority of agency spending goes to tax credit programs. Additionally, 1/3 of agency spending goes to personnel, with the remaining spending going towards the cloud revenue integrated system, contracts, and other expenses. Moving on to Exhibit 5 on page 9, Looking at the agency spending by function, we can see, again, the majority of their spending goes towards tax credit programs at 60%, with real property assessments comprising 27%, and the charter unit and administration and IT funds contributing the rest. Looking at Exhibit 6 on page 10, for the tax credit program spending, we can see that the homeowner's tax credit is the majority of the spending at 64%, with the enterprise zone tax credit another 31%, and the renter's tax credit comprising the rest. Looking at Exhibit 7 on page 11, we can see that their overall budget increases by about $4 million, or 2.5%. This is largely driven by an $8 million increase for the homeowner's tax credit, as well as a $5.3 million increase for the audit of the homestead tax credit. This audit will look at homes actively receiving the credit and could have substantial impacts for state revenues for accounts for homeowners found to be incorrectly receiving the tax credit. Additionally, we can see at the bottom of Exhibit 7 that the repayment to the local reserve account is about $8 million to finalize the Chapter 717 of 2021 obligations. On page 12, with the personnel data, we can see that SSTAT currently has 58 vacancies, 26 of which, or 45%, have been vacant for less than 6 months. 6 of them, or 10%, have been vacant for more than a year. Moving on to the issues on page 13, the real property assessor vacancies remain a problem. High turnover for real property assessor positions has troubled SSTAT for many years, primarily due to competitive salaries for similar positions in other jurisdictions. The assessor vacancy rate has increased from 10.9% in fiscal 2022 to 14.2% in fiscal 2023. However, SSTAT has tried to combat this to their credit. They have included a number of recruitment attempts, such as attending job fairs, posting notices about assessor vacancies on social media and in local newspapers. They have noted that in their October 2022 JCR response that they had an average of 15.2 applicants per job posting for the real property assessors. Also worth noting that since the time of this report's publication, SSTAT has submitted their January 15th JCR response. If we look at Exhibit 8, on page 14, we can look at the real property assessor 1 vacancies by county, and that Baltimore City and Prince George's County remain with high vacancies despite a little bit of progress made. SSTAT should comment on its progress and challenges in hiring and retaining assessors. Additionally, DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SSTAT continue to provide quarterly updates on its real property valuation program and discuss initiatives to improve recruitment and retention. At the bottom of page 14, there's a homeowners and renters tax credit discussion, which is shown visually in Exhibit 9 on page 15. And we can see that the homeowners tax credit applications have declined by 8.7%, and the renter's tax credit has declined by 15.5%. However, the percentage of applicants for both tax credits deemed eligible have increased. This is largely due to a popular misunderstanding in the previous year, in which during the pandemic, more people thought they would be eligible for tax relief. This year, people were aware of the fact they would not qualify and did not reapply. Exhibits 10 and 11 on page 16 show the tax credit utilization for the homeowners and renters tax credit, which we can see peaks for homeowners in 2019 before declining steadily through 2022. Additionally, we can see here that the fiscal 2023 appropriation was originally $64 million, reduced to $48 million to bring it more in line with historical spending. SSTAT has noted that increased levels of inflation impact the number of individuals that meet the eligibility criteria for these programs. In response to that, DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SSTAT submit a report on options to alter eligibility requirements to increase the pool of eligible applicants. On page 17, there's a discussion of the cloud revenue integrated system staffing instability. And while considerable progress has been made on this IT project, SSTAT has gone through multiple mainframe technical specialists on staff within the past calendar year. mainly citing salary concerns. The agency should comment on how it plans to improve retention of the technical mainframe specialists and how retention challenges might delay progress of the CRIS project. DLS recommends adopting committee narrative requesting that SDAT submit quarterly reports on CRIS project progress. The final sections provide the exact wording for the narratives which we've recommended, as well as additional appendices. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our analysts? All right, seeing none, thank you so very much, Mr. Green, for your thorough analysis. And next we'll have up Director Michael Higgs from the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, and please introduce your panel.
Good afternoon, Chair Bridges, Vice Chair Ivey, and members of the Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee. I am Michael Higgs, Director of the Maryland State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Thank you for taking the time to review SDAT's budget performance. SDAT is charged with the assessment of all real property and business personal property in the state, maintaining the state's charter business registry, and processing important property-based tax credits. I have with me some of our subject matter experts to help answer any questions you may have. Associate Director Stephen Clampett is here to address any questions related to business services or tax credits. I have State Supervisor of Real Property Dan Phillips back here to answer any questions you may have about our largest program. We have CFO Christina Trotta available for any questions about the budget. Bob Yeager is back here if anyone has questions about the Homeowners Protection Program that SDAT operates. And our Customer Experience Operations Manager, Jamie Clark, is going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about our exciting plans for the upcoming year. Jamie?
Thank you, Director. Greetings, members of the Chair and Subcommittee. Again, my name is Jamie Clark.
If you could pull it a little closer to you.
Sorry. My name is Jamie Clark, and I'm the Operations Manager for the new Office of Customer Experience that was recently formed last year in 2022. The mission for this office is quite simple. It is to create and maintain an engaged and informed workplace. Understanding our employees' needs as well as our customers' needs will be key to influencing engagement within our agency. We also understand that the best way to provide customer service to the public is to provide our team with great support, training, communication, and employee recognition. So how are we going to do this? What we're focused on is developing and executing strategies that empower our employees to focus on 3 Ps: people, performance, and progress. Starting with people engagement is the first step to maintain successful customer service as well as employee retention. When engagement is high, we know that our employees will be driven to provide exceptional experiences and serve the agency's mission, and more importantly, stay with us. How are we doing this again? We're looking on standardizing new hire onboarding training for all divisions, including real property, and including a customer service call flow guide. These trainings will also highlight the importance of listening to both the voice of the customer strategy and also through customer journey mapping that will provide insight on how to detect as well as remove any sludge to improve customer outcomes. Our leadership development program is also going to include improvement for digital literacy and moving our supervisors from traditional leadership to more servant leadership to help manage and inspire a diverse workforce, which is critical for the success of SDAT. When moving on to performance, the efforts of the Office of Customer Experience include performing performance analysis and programs, public contents review, processes and procedures, all while recommending including the use of new technology. We are using a design thinking approach, which is a problem-solving technique that puts real people in the center of the development process, which enables us to streamline services and provide support that are tailored to our audience's needs. Lastly, we are focused on progress. And this office is going to track and measure the progress by performing follow-up reviews to ensure all suggested improvements are functioning as expected and customers' needs are being met. These strategies were already used with the development of our customer service contact center, which is the primary and centralized hub for our business services right now. And I'm truly confident that by expanding these strategies to the rest of the agency, that we will continue to serve as far as our customer first mission and also be there to keep an engaged workforce and improve employee retention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing those plans that we have. Jamie's such an integral part of our team, and we're really excited about how she's going to help us with employee retention as much as the services that we provide to all of our customers. SDAT has no objection to the recommended actions from the DLS analyst, and we have our written testimony has answered the questions asked, but if anyone would like to drill down a little deeper, we are here for you right now.
Thank you very much. I see that my vice chair has no? Not right now, okay. Well, let me ask you a little bit more. Just looking at the assessors, I know that you provided some written comments. Can you just talk a little bit more about what your plans are for the committee about the hiring and retention of those assessors?
So the problem that we have with the assessment team is that it takes 3 years to train a residential assessor. They go through assessor 1, 2, and 3, and if they advance beyond that, then it takes another 3 years to train up a commercial assessor. Once we have our assessors trained up, we've put in 2 to 3 years of training, now their salaries are very uncompetitive with those in Fairfax, Washington, D.C., Loudoun County, Pennsylvania counties, where the counties are handling the hiring of assessors themselves versus the state and Maryland centralizing that process, and we just can't compete. We're losing assessors who leave in Montgomery County. I know of a couple examples of assessors who have left to become clerks in Montgomery County government because they get paid more to move around papers and boxes than the highly trained work that we have at SDAT. This situation really is starting to become untenable. We talked about the 5% dip in our assessment metrics. We've been doing more with less every year on budget, and we are starting to hit the breaking point in real property. And we have ideas, but we don't have a solution on our own. It's going to have to take an engaged cooperative effort to overcome this problem.
Thank you for that.
Maybe that's the right time. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Higgs, I appreciate you being here. I really appreciate the work that SDAT's been doing over the years. I have a couple questions slightly off topic. Have you ever heard of some allegations of racial disparities on housing assessments across the country?
Yes. So what Maryland does that's different than what happens in many other places in the country is the way that we define our neighborhood groupings. Mm-hmm. In other areas of the country where racial disparities have been proven to be a problem in assessments and in the appraisal business, we have addressed that by having much tighter, smaller groups of neighborhood by definition, so that we're comparing like properties, properties with similar characteristics, where the externalities that affect a home's value are much more localized and are shared within that grouping. Sure. And then after the fact, we go back and apply statistical analysis to all of our assessments to determine how far off from actual market value sales we were. And even with this last year where our metrics fell 5%, we're still within industry standards of plus or minus 10% off of that 100%. And we never want to go over. I never want to be at 100.1% of value. Sure. We always shoot for 99.9%.
Understood. And Director, thank you. You're always a straight shooter, and I really do appreciate that. You said proven to be a problem. I have a Washington Post article dated March 23rd, 2022, where actually one of our new delegates from Bowie is highlighted here about alleging that her appraisal fell short of what it should have been by about $300,000, which is pretty significant. And so, again, I just wanted to ask if you've read this article specifically about Prince George's County, which is one of the wealthier, predominantly African-American counties in the nation, if you're aware of this specific article that I'm talking about.
I am not aware of that article, but as soon as we get out of here, I'm going to make sure I look it up and read that.
Wonderful.
I do know that Prince George's County has some issues in their office that they are working very hard to overcome. Retention and recruitment in Prince George's County has been very difficult given their location and the fact that it's so easy for Washington, D.C. to poach the talent that we have there.
Sure. But
we have an African-American supervisor, African-American deputy supervisor, and those guys are very attuned to these issues and are working hard to make sure that they don't have racially disparate data coming from their offices.
Sure. It just looks like it falls pretty significantly out of the 5% threshold of accuracy.
In that one, certainly, a $300,000 discrepancy.
By the way, hats off to the individual we're speaking of. Do you have any data on these assessments broken down by like race specifically?
No, we do not. We don't have racial information for who owns a property.
Okay.
We don't track that in our database. Right?
If you want to come up and they can't hear you since we're virtual. Thank you.
Dan Phillips, State Supervisor of Assessment Real Property Division. I am familiar with the article. I have read that. I have spoken to the delegate in question and researched her property, among other things. One of the things that we have is that typically in most jurisdictions, when we get building permits, we actually have an estimate of the cost of the construction, which gives us an idea of what's inside because we don't go inside.
Sure.
We're dependent on what we see from the exterior of the property. That is something that last July has been rectified by the Prince George's County government. We are now getting that information, but that does make it more difficult for our staff to do their job. The other thing to remember as we're going through these, and this was a case in that property, is we will value property in an area once every 3 years, and that's using the prior year's data, sales data. When something is built between those 3 cycles, by law, we have to value it based the same as other homes in that neighborhood were last valued. So there might be a 2-year gap there can be in the cost of constructions and the market data from what that person pays for it 2 years into our 3-year cycle than how everything else was reassessed at the beginning of the cycle. So that can create some of these discrepancies where it appears we've undervalued the property, but in reality, we're looking at sales data from the last time the whole area was reassessed in valuing. And that's to be fair so that everybody is taxed on the same basis. No one's, penalized for buying something, building something in the middle of that 3-year cycle.
You said you looked into this specific case and
Yes.
that it was rectified.
And I responded to the delegate directly, yes.
And so are there some safeguards that we should be implementing to make sure that we don't have to double back and go through this process?
Well, the Prince George's County issue with the permits where
Sure.
all the other counties were giving us permits for new construction that was over $100,000. Prince George's County was not doing that, and we've since worked that out with them just recently so that now they are sending us that information so that we can go out and when there is a substantial addition put on a property, we can capture that. And we didn't have that data the first time.
All right, I just have one more question, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So really just more of a statement. There are many people whose homes are valued around $300,000 and they don't have the resources to go and have these fights like some individuals named on this article do. So I just wanted to lift that up. I have a separate little curveball, and I apologize, Mr. Chair. But there's a narrative that SDAT's changing the rules for how it assesses improvements on assessments on farms. Is that true? It just doesn't sound right.
So we assess agricultural property according to state tax property article. Dan can tell you the exact number. There has been a move afoot to expand the definition of what constitutes agricultural property to include buildings used for farm breweries, for event spaces, for other things. And this has been a discussion. SDAT was involved in a work-study group this past year that was legislatively mandated. I don't know where that is currently. Dan, if you want to give an update on the latest.
Well, we did do the report that we submitted to the legislature. And a couple things to mention that I just want to mention on that is that the tax property article, specifically for valuing farms, does state that the department shall establish regulations for the criteria for that. We have always allowed growing of crops as being considered one of the primary purpose of agricultural land. Retail operations, manufacturing operations have not been considered agricultural. With some of the changes that the value-added industry wants to make, that if they there's been an expansion of that on farms. It's something that we had not had an issue with until recently. The expansion of the alcohol farm operations has largely driven this narrative. Because as that industry has expanded from a few wineries to now many farm breweries, many wedding facilities that are located on agricultural property, the department, in accordance with COMAR, that says, here are the approved agricultural activities. Hosting weddings is not one of the approved agricultural activities. So we have not changed that. And when it really goes back, even there's a 1979 case that went through to the Court of Special Appeals that stated that any of these special use exceptions are effectively an exemption, and any discrepancy or anything should be resolved in favor of the state, that it should be strictly construed. So that's what the department has done since that 1979 ruling. We've not changed. What's changed is an increase in the number of farm breweries, wedding facilities, and all placed on farms.
Thank you. That sounds about right. And if you all could just get the answers that you provided in writing, I really would appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I will just note that we're also joined by the Vice Chair of Appropriations Committee as well. Thank you for joining us. And I know I saw Delegate Acevedo. Did you have a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Not anymore, because it was answered in all the question were being asked, but just to put out another example, there was a case in Baltimore City with a Johns Hopkins University professor who teaches redlining, et cetera, who had a similar case. So, but yeah, no, my question was answered. Appreciate Delegate Ivey, appreciate the responses. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate McComas.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is kind of somewhat off the subject, but maybe not off the subject. I remember last session there was an issue about that sometimes the banks were not giving people the mortgage for the real value of the house if the person that met the mortgage people that came into the house were met by a black individual. So sometimes when there was interracial marriage, the white wife or the white husband would be there, but the other spouse wouldn't be there. And it was brought to our attention, I think, by Delegate Holmes, and he actually gave me an article about it. And so it's sort of like, wow, that's pretty incredible. And of course, it was pretty much, I think, centered in Prince George's County, but I'm not going to swear to it because I gave the article back to Delegate Holmes because he actually had the original. And he said, oh, yeah, it's right. So it's true. So then the other question I have is, I come from a state, I was raised in a state which was a non-disclosure state. And so the assessors go around and they assess the property, but I don't know how somehow they get the value of the properties that have been sold, but if I went in and I knew the value of a property and I exposed it from that office, the assessor's office, you could be charged with a criminal offense, believe it or not. So all of the deeds are $10 and other valuable consideration. And, you know, I don't know how they do their work, but, and of course it's all confidential. And if you're a citizen where they've reassessed your property, what happens is you got 1 month and you or an agent of yours has to go down and ask for the catchment area where they did the property assessments. And so you have all the properties that they assessed to come to the value of your house. So it's kind of a whole different kettle of fish. And has Maryland always been the way it is, where everybody knows the value of everybody's property on SStat?
Yes, we have free and open data available to the public that includes the actual sale price, purchase price of each property as recorded down at the court. And it doesn't say for good and valuable consideration. It's actually the actual purchase price
but I
number.
don't think that's always been if you look at old deeds, I don't think that's always
Early
been the case.
1980s is when that changed for us.
All right.
So
Well,
that's
I'm
so
talking
since
about,
then,
like,
SSAT has
back.
been putting out all this data publicly. So if you want to know the assessed value of your neighbor's house, that's online, and the what they actually paid to buy it.
Do you
when
think
they moved
it's
in.
a good process, though? Have we ever re-examined and said this is good or this is not good, this is fair or it's not fair? I'm just asking.
The
way we do it
posting
now
the data?
versus the states that don't disclose the data. I'm just wondering.
We have a philosophy that providing data free and open to the public is a good thing. By and large, it's the second most visited website in the state of Maryland. I hear from real estate agents, I hear from bankers, I hear from all manner of people that they're on our website every single day. They lament the states and the jurisdictions outside of Maryland that charge for such data. So I think that what we're doing is a very good thing in that instance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No, yeah, you are absolutely fine. I just have a few last questions that I wanted to ask about your ability to monitor the tax credit programs and detecting fraud. How do you currently quantify the amount of unqualified tax credit recipients across the state?
I'm going to let Stephen address that.
I'm sorry.
Yep, for the primary tax credit programs like homestead tax credit and homeowner, how do you currently quantify the amount of unqualified tax credit recipients that you have from across the state?
As far as that number, I would have to get back to you with regards to that process. You know, right now we have contracted with a tax management associates group.
You might want to move the mic closer. Yep. Thanks.
Certainly. So we have recently contracted with a tax management associates group in which we're piloting a program to better audit our homestead tax credit program. This contract's in its infancy, but right now we're certainly sort of exploring the way to better audit what is being submitted and approved.
So they're going to be putting those compliance controls in place, or they're just doing an audit for now?
Well, right now it's sort of an exploratory audit to see if we can figure out a larger program.
Gotcha.
They leverage big data sources to find out if people actually have this home in Maryland as their primary residence for more than 6 months of the year. Are they applying for homestead tax credits in other states? Things that we don't have the ability to find out ourselves. So this is going to really help us root out any fraud or abuse of the homestead credit. But I think what you were referring to was a little bit more toward the homeowners and renters tax credits. We have been engaged in an awareness program for the past 5 years or so for these tax credit programs, where we work with the comptroller's office to determine eligibility for people based on their income tax filings, and then we run through our records to see who hasn't applied for this tax credit, but they should be eligible for it based on the comptroller's numbers. We send them out a postcard or a letter in the mail. I think we average about 120,000 per year in that awareness campaign. So we've increased the number of applicants. The problem we have, though, is that the numbers that are used as the basis for these tax credit programs for the eligibility haven't changed since the early 90s. So every bit of inflation, of higher incomes and everything like that shrinks the pool of potentially eligible people every year. So without those numbers changing, I fear we're going to continue to see an ever-shrinking number of recipients of these tax credit programs.
Gotcha. But there are some that actually apply that for some of these other programs that apply, but also apply out of state for homeowners tax credits, and those folks
Well, it's not homeowners, it's homestead is the one where we're getting them out of state.
Yes. Right. But we are tracking those individuals to figure out what our revenue loss might be for those as well.
Yeah, we'll know once we get the report back. The issue with the homestead tax credit is that we have to find out, did their house value increase enough for the homestead credit to kick in? I live in Montgomery County, thank you, like our delegate over here, and we have a 10% homestead tax cap, which really stinks because when the market is going up, we don't get any relief from that. We saw a 22% rise in Montgomery County in the last triennial, and that means basically nobody's getting the homestead credit in Montgomery. If you're in Talbot County, I think, has a 0%, so when you move into your home, your tax basis is set for the life of the home. And then, you know, other counties with rates in between. So it's one of those things where we won't know how much money can be recouped until we find out where these things have been happening and all that. And that's what the analysis from Tax Management Associates is going to show us.
Do you know how long that'll probably take you, the analysis?
That right now, it's in its infancy. We're looking at one county at the moment to sort of see how the data is going to, you know, flow through the system, but whether or not we want to expand out program.
Gotcha. Well, we look forward to hearing more information about this and staying close to the findings once you have that information.
For sure. We're excited about it.
Yep. All right. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you all very much. That will end the State Department of Assessment and Taxation hearing, and we will move right along to Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board. And we'll begin with our analysis by Mr. Green.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Looking at the Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board, on page 1, we can see that the fiscal 2024 budget would increase by $103,000 or 9.2% to $1.2 million. Moving on to the top of page 2, we can see that there is one proposed deficiency in the fiscal 2023, and that's for $35,000 for 2 contractual full-time equivalents to help manage the case backlog. Also on page 2, looking at Exhibit 1 for the overview of agency spending, we can see that the vast majority of expenses for PTAB are related to personnel, with rent and service allocations and other expenses making up the rest. Looking at Exhibit 2 on page 3, again, we can see that the total increase is at $100,000 or 9.2%. And this is largely driven by health insurance premiums as well as reducing the contractual turnover expectancy to 0. On page 4, looking at personnel data, there's one vacancy in the department that's been open less than 3 months. At the top of page 5, the first key observation is that the case backlog remains high. Looking at Exhibit 3 on page 5, we can see that while there's been considerable more cases cleared in 2021 than 2020, the backlog continues to increase, and this is partially driven by COVID-19 pandemic-related closures and overall factors in 2020. Additionally, SDAT's assessing problem has partially bled into PTAB as assessors need to be involved in those hearings. However, the DLS still would like PTAB to comment on the degree to which their agreements with SDAT have assisted the agency in addressing the backlog, how the new contractual full-time equivalents will assist in resolving the backlog, and when it foresees its backlog returning to pre-pandemic levels. Looking at Exhibit 4 on page 6, we can see that reversals by the Maryland Tax Court have doubled since the previous year. However, if we compare that to the preceding 5-year period, the reversals are still lower at only 10% compared to the 5-year average, which is 14%. Finally, on page 7, our recommendation is that we concur with the governor's allowance. Thank you again.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our analysts? Seeing none, you did a very thorough job. We definitely appreciate you once again, Mr. Green. And with that, we will turn to our Administrator, Julie Green-Christ.
Hi, thank you, Chairman Bridges and members of the subcommittee. I'm the Administrator of the Property Tax Assessment Appeal Boards. We are the second level of the appeals system. As you see, you have our testimony before you, and I am here to answer any and all questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Oh, Delegate McCombs.
Mhm.
%, overview of spending allocations for, it's on the pie chart, it's on Exhibit 1.
Although it's written for our offices also have meeting rooms, but that's only in the 5 metropolitan counties.
Okay.
That fall directly under the Property Tax Assessment Appeal Boards.
Oh, okay, so I guess my question was, do you have to pay rent for any space in the Mary Ristow building?
No, usually the counties, all 24 jurisdictions, well, the 19 jurisdictions usually are forthcoming in giving us meeting space somewhere.
Okay.
Rent-free.
well, no, I was just wondering if you had to pay to the state for space in the Mary Ristow building.
No.
It's in Harford County,
No.
Bel Air. No, okay.
No.
All right, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be real quick. Can you get us the information broken down by county?
What information? What particular?
Okay, so the number of appeals that are brought forward, how many of them are actually found to be correct and that they should have been appealed, so on and so forth.
That will go into different details. I can offer anything you want on any of the states. We will have to break that down per county.
Yeah.
But if you want to look back in 2022, we had approximately, well, mainly our problem is the rollovers, but when we come into 2022, our numbers are looking like we had 7,615 cases received in the entire state.
Yeah.
Of those cases, we heard 5,876. And then what we call cleared is when that are cases heard, withdrawn, and dismissed.
Right.
And of that, it was 10,867. We still have 2,224 cases that were still pending at the end of December. I can break that down by counties and forward that information to you if you would like.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? You just have, Mr. Vice Chair.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for being here. Question I have is regarding the jurisdictions and the memberships on, are there currently any areas of the state where members are needed to serve on the board on PTABs in the different jurisdictions?
There are numerous areas. We are having a problem in retention in some board members. Board members that apply are usually retired, and we can't have somebody who has a full-time job and still be in the 5 metropolitan counties, as that's being a board member in the 5 metropolitan counties is primarily a full-time job. And so to have another job, it precedes, and we have board members who are not capable of being present when they're being called upon to serve. And to me, their job is to serve the appellants in each and every county. But we have a lot of them that are leaving and withdrawing, and getting those applicants in seems to be a hard thing to do. I don't know why, but when the governor's appointments office puts information out, they may receive one name for 3 different open positions. So we're having a problem with retention in the board members per se.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, perhaps maybe get a follow-up report from your agency and seeing how the legislature can help in identifying prospective candidates to serve in those roles.
I would love to do that, and I would provide as much as I can But the governor's appointments office more so is responsible in reaching out to each and every county in the jurisdictions, letting them know that those appointments are available. And then the counties take out, I think they're supposed to do one advertisement, and when those applicants come in, those applicants then are sent to the governor's appointments office for further review. And for that then goes to the Board of Public Works. And when that goes to the Board of Public Works, then the appointed position is made from there in the governor's office.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. We may want to get some clarity on that. And I guess part of the reason I ask is because I remember a particular incident, I guess last year around Prince George's County and the reconstitution of that board and you know, all the things that happened with that. So maybe just trying to get a little bit more clarity on what the process is in relation to the governor's office and how much influence they have in appointing the members of the board, if you could find that information for us. But just in regards to Prince George's County, how are they doing in particular right now? Because I believe they had to get an all-new board.
It was an all-new board appointed, correct? That board came in January of 22. We spent approximately 4 to 5 weeks in training. They were gung-ho, ready to go, excited to get in, and so far, so good. They're doing great. I have no problems so far.
Gotcha.
But if I could further clarify, for each open position, like I said, the county, I know it's kind of confusing, but the county will go out and advertise for that position. And once they advertise for that position, 3 names for each position is supposed to be forwarded to the governor's appointments office. In the smaller counties, they have a difficult time in finding 3 names for one position. So the governor's office will contact that county and say, is there anything else that we can do? Is there any more advertisement that needs to be done? And the county say, this is all we could get. So the governor's office then goes off of either 3 names per one position or 1 name for a position in making the appointment.
Yeah, I think it just sounds like there's a misstep somewhere along the way, because I think each one of us probably would love to know when those advertisements go out, and if we could help in any way, I think the delegates and the members on the other side in the Senate would also want to be able to help push some of those names forward. So.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. That would be a good thing, yes.
Sorry, Delegate McCombs.
I'm not familiar with the appeals board, but the question is what type of reimbursement for travel do they have if let's say they live in 20 miles away or 10 or whatever, and then do they get some kind of stipend? Because some of the agencies that we have that the let's say county executive can appoint, they have some kind of stipend, whether it's the liquor board or the library trustee or something. I was wondering, just kind of so that we kind of know that they're not just there free judges, so to speak. So
no, they are not free judges. DBM has never found out a way to name them, so they're not contractual and they're not full-time employees. They're board members that sit on an as-needed basis. They are reimbursed at $30 an hour. So, and if one board member, they should never have to travel to another county, but if that would happen, yes, they are paid for their expenses. In their county, no. But it is $30 an hour, but they are not eligible for any benefits.
All right. Any other questions? If not, thank you, Administrator. Definitely appreciate your time, and we look forward to working with you more in the future.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and excuse my nervousness. It's been a long time and a couple years.
No problem. All right, that will end the hearing on property tax assessment appeals, and that will end our Public Safety and Administration Subcommittee hearing today. Thank you all.